test. 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is my test.
Okay, hi everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, I suppose. All friends of PI, thanks for coming. One of our few first physical events, I suppose. Yeah, just to mark that COVID is almost over, I suppose. Well, 3 days ago, we already had we hosted in this room a talk by a visiting professor from University of Edinburgh, Professor Janet Carsten. She spoke here on weddings and how these take place in Penang. Today we have another professor with us. This one is from the National University of Singapore. But we cannot say that he is visiting. No, the National Technological NTU, right? National Technological University, Nanyang. Of Singapore, but we cannot say that he's visiting because he is a Penang Free School boy and he visits Penang very often for the food, so we cannot really call him a visitor. Penang in many ways remains his home, we know that for sure. So welcome home, Professor Euston Quah, and thank you for agreeing to talk to us today on cost-benefit analysis, a subject that is a great passion for you, I understand. Why I mentioned the earlier talk about weddings is, of course, that today's subject makes me wonder how much people getting married actually carry out a cost-benefit analysis before taking the lead. Since I became much more conscious about CBA after an interview with Professor Quah a few months ago, and that interview is in last month's Penang Monthly, by the way, so you can read it online. Or if there are still copies of last month's issue, you can pick it up on the way out. I suspect the answer to that earlier question is a lot, right? People do carry out CBA analysis, whether intuitively or not. I think I do it subconsciously quite a lot in all my important decisions of the day. So today, Professor Quah is here to make that silent yet important mental process as conscious for us as possible. After listening to this talk today, you will never make decisions the same way again. Also, needless to say, policy-making processes will gain much from a cost-benefit analysis being performed early in the process. As a think tank, therefore, Penang Institute welcomes Professor Quah most warmly to teach us as much as possible in an hour or so about CBA and about how we can apply and encourage others to apply cost-benefit analysis in their decision-making. So welcome, Professor Euston Quah. Please come on stage. The floor is yours.
I don't have to remove this. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ki Beng. So I'm, first of all, very happy to be here today. This is actually my second or third time, not with the Penang Institute, but the predecessor institute called the Seri Penang, I think. And so it's like a homecoming for me to see the institute again and to meet new people as well. I'm also delighted to see a number of my classmates from both Wellesley Primary School and the Penang Free School who are here today. And I have my sister and my nephew are here today as well. And so quite happy with them as well for showing up. Now, this topic actually, I hope it wouldn't be too dry for you, but I'll try to make it as engaging as possible. And I would like to start off by talking about what do we really know about cost-benefit analysis, right? This is a subject which I excel in, meaning that my expertise, publish a lot of papers and books on it. But we all do cost-benefit analysis. Think about it. Nobody does anything without thinking about costs and benefits. Everything in our lives, daily lives, are affected by cost-benefit analysis. Coming to this talk, for example, is cost-benefit analysis because you are giving up something to come here. And the return would be, hopefully, you learn something, you improve your knowledge and skills in the area. You sharpen your thinking on the subject. And an afternoon that is well spent. The cost would be you give up, like in economics, we like to say opportunity cost of alternative uses of your time. Some of you may be in business too. So lost opportunities may arise, but you would have factored all this in, right? Now, some people say cost-benefit analysis is just a science of common sense. And it is common sense. And going back to what I said earlier about being part of our daily lives, taking up a course, buying a car, buying a house, where to live, is all cost-benefit analysis. Even trying to find a potential mate, a partner in your life. Giving talks about marriage. It's all cost-benefit analysis. Nobody just marries somebody or have a partner with somebody, boyfriend, girlfriend, just at the whim of it. Let's go. No, people do make rational decisions. And let's take a simple date. We go on a date. Where do we go? Nobody just simply say, oh, let's go on a date and then close our eye and then we just pick any place. No, you decide, right? You bring a girl out, for example, it depends a lot on how much you have, your budget and your time. If your exam is pressing you next week, then you better spend less time. If you have not a big budget, maybe McDonald's, hawker center. If you have slightly larger budget, you take the girl to fine dining and so on. So that's the thinking process. And what do you hope to expect out of it? Well, a certain kind of satisfaction, a kind of investment that what you put in, hopefully the return will be a positive one. And marginally it increases, right, over several dates and so on. So my point is that we apply cost-benefit analysis as an individual to everything that we do. Tell me something that people don't apply cost-benefit analysis. It's very rare. Now, the firm, meaning the organization, also apply cost-benefit analysis. We learn again, the firm needs to think about what to produce, where to locate, should we subcontract, should we, offshore, should we, all kinds of things they have to think about in terms of, as a firm, how many people to hire, should we substitute with more machines? They have to do their calculations as well. Now, of course, the firm is interested in profits, and they're actually, so their calculation is slightly more precise compared to the individual. But the individual, I'm not talking about they take out a pen or paper to go and calculate these costs and benefits. But in their mind, implicitly, they are thinking about these costs and benefits. Less precise way for the individual, slightly more precise for the firm. And then what about the state, the government? Cost-benefit analysis is even more important to the government because they have to allocate the scarce resources that they have. They have limited budget and they have to allocate it efficiently, right? In such a way that it brings a high return for not the government, but for the society that they are governing. So cost-benefit analysis traditionally is actually geared towards public sector investments. The private sector does what we call financial appraisal, investment analysis. It's very different from cost-benefit analysis. So I hope to tell you more about this as we go along, to tell you the difference between private investment and public sector investment, and this whole subject about cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so I have some slides for you, but I may not use all the slides. So this is roughly the content of my talk today, depending on the time, so how much we can cover. Now, where does actually cost-benefit analysis come from? It's the private, it's the applied part of welfare economics. So welfare economics studies how much, what do we do, how do we do what do we do to increase society's welfare, how to maximize society's welfare. And there are certain conditions for maximization of that welfare. And so a competitive equilibrium, like a competitive economy, can lead to a welfare maximum. So welfare economics studies all this, but they're all purely, mostly theoretical ideals. But then came cost-benefit analysis, which actually aims to transform, to apply the welfare principles of economics into everyday life, into projects, programs, and policies. So it's very suited for public sector investment projects. The subject actually has a long, long history, beginning with Jules Dupuy. Jules Dupuy was a French civil engineer, and Jules Dupuy was the first to talk about the concept of how do you measure benefits. So when you talk to engineers, when you build a bridge, for example, they are interested in make sure that the amount that they collected from the toll would exceed the maintenance, the operation, and the building of the bridge. But it was Jules Dupuy who said, well, it goes more than that. It talks about that people derive surplus value from crossing the bridge. And just like when you buy a cup of coffee, right? It's not the price of the coffee only, but you might be prepared to pay above the price of coffee, which in economics we call consumer surplus, right? But nobody announces what this consumer surplus is. They go and buy a cup of coffee at $2, but inside your mind, you're thinking of $3, right? I'm prepared to pay up to $3. So your willingness to pay is up to $3. Cup of coffee costs $2, so you gain by $1. So Dupuy was brought out this subject about that people derive surplus values, right, above what you actually see them pay. So, and that sparked up the interest as a measurement of benefit, which is through this form of consumer surplus. Now, the real happening or real activity of cost-benefit analysis began in 1934, actually, 36, in the U.S. Flood Control Act. So, many governments in the U.S., and especially back in those times, when the U.S. is starting to open up, and so many of the states applied for funding from the federal agency, they especially related to water projects. And because many of the states use different kind of accounting, different kind of application criteria and so on, so Washington decided, well, let's standardize this. And they came up with this U.S. Flood Control Act 1936, where they argued that all projects applications submitted for funding by all the provinces or the states must go under a principle of the maximizing net social benefit. Not gross benefit, but net social benefit, which means the benefit minus the cost. And the recipient of those benefits and costs must be society as a whole, not any smaller segment of society, but society as a whole. So in this Flood Control Act, it's amazing that they expanded the audience, meaning the audience for costs and benefits, those who are going to be impacted by projects of the government, and those impacts must be accounted for society as a whole, and not just a firm, not just a town, not just a city, the whole country. And the idea is also to look at the net rather than just gross benefit, right, when they calculate this. So this 1936 Act became instrumental in establishing cost-benefit analysis. Now, in the 50s onwards, most of the efforts there have to do with streamlining, refining those processes of costs and benefits. So for those of you who are familiar, we have the Green Books series in the US, then the US Bureau of the Budget, and then in the 60s, in UK, Canada, CBA becomes quite important, and they apply this to, for example, tunnels and highway. Some of you will recognize the M1 highway. They actually use the CBA, the Channel Tunnel connecting between, UK and the mainland European continent. And OECD also requires CBA for major regulations. And in the 70s, the United Nations require CBA, right? And for major projects, and the World Bank, and culminating in 1992, the Earth Summit or at Rio, where less developed countries applying for funds from the World Bank and the United Nations, they would have to do a cost-benefit analysis. So that was like the pinnacle of the CBA. And coming to more recent times in the 2000s, CBA is also applied to regulatory policies, financial regulations, and so on. So the US has required CBA to be used to assess the implementation of new financial regulations, Securities Commission, and so on and so forth. So basically, there's a nutshell. That's a chronology of events from the CBA. Now you will find that CBA comes in many forms. So the Americans will call it benefit cost analysis. Some people say Americans are optimistic people, so they put the benefit up front. The British is cost benefit analysis, more pessimistic, focusing on cost. And then the Asians are more pragmatic people, and so they call it as simple as the project evaluation, right? So these are three different names, terminologies, but they're all the same. They're basically all the same. There are many applications that you can use for CBA. Many of you would think cost-benefit analysis simply means applying to infrastructure, building a road, building a tunnel, building an airport, right? Building a factory, building all this. It's all infrastructure related. True, the original form, the original version of CBA has to do with infrastructure assessment. But CBA is also used increasingly over the years on non-infrastructure projects, such as on health programs, transport projects, and all kinds of like assessing diseases and illnesses, amount of investment that we want to put into it, looking at crimes rate, how much policing need to be done, and so on and so forth. So the point is that CBA is not just limited to infrastructures, but also to the non-infrastructure assessments. And it helps in prioritizing projects, evaluation of health education services, and regulatory reforms. Now, if you go back to the 80s, actually, I landed in Singapore in the late 80s. And from the 80s to at least well up to the late 90s and early 2000s, Singapore, like many countries, many governments, use not CBA, but rather CEA, which is cost effectiveness analysis, which is widely used, including up to today. Many governments still use it. But cost effectiveness analysis is very different from CBA. Cost effectiveness simply means that we have decided to do this. So now we just need to find the cheapest way to do it. Right? So the target or the outcome is already decided. So how to achieve this outcome? There might be several, 3, 4 options. So we just need to analyze the cost of this to achieve that. That's all. The other thing is that when you talk about cost effectiveness analysis, they often are concerned with commercial values. So you take, for example, a project which causes congestion, all right? Congestion in the neighborhood. When they build, when they urbanize the neighborhood, when they develop the neighborhood, right? So that development, the redevelopment of the neighborhood, or maybe a MRT project, a rapid transit project, right? That brings a lot of gains to the neighborhood in commercial things, land value, rental value, business, but it also brings congestion, and such things like congestion and also noise to people living around the area. Now, cost effectiveness analysis would never bother with these things. And these are called the non-commercial values, or what we call intangible values. But CBA takes that into account. So there's a difference between CEA and CBA. So CEA, just you have to remember that they are not concerned with how worthwhile is this proposal. Is it better than another proposal? It is not concerned with why are we doing this? How do we know that the benefits of this proposal, right, is bigger than its cost. That's not the purview of CEA. So CEA is only interested in how to achieve something that we have already decided. Find the cheapest way to do it. That's CEA, right? So there's a big difference. Now, I said earlier that CBA and between CBA and private investment analysis are quite different. So in the case of the CBA, we take society's viewpoint as a whole. In the case of private investment analysis or financial appraisal, so a lot of you who go to business school, they will learn financial appraisal. Right? It's part of their curriculum, and everybody knows how to do these calculations. But their purview, meaning the target audience that is receiving this and looking at this, is not society as large, but rather the firm itself, the shareholders or the owners of the company. So the benefits and costs, the gains and the losses, the profits, all these things, they are looking at the perspective of the shareholders and the owners. They are not looking at society as a whole. So that's a very big difference. The second difference is that in private sector investment analysis, they use only market prices. So in other words, when you see something that's a market price and you ascribe the benefit or the cost to the market price, right? That is private sector investment analysis. Right? It's not concerned with whether this company's action causes pollution, environmental degradation, right? Or destruction of aesthetic values. They're not interested because it doesn't affect them unless they have to pay for it. So, for example, a factory pollutes a river in the process of its production, right? As long as they don't have to pay while they pollute the river, there's no taxation, there's no accountability, then it doesn't factor into the price of the product that the factory, the cost that the factory incurs, right? So the factory incurs manpower costs, incurs capital costs, all these costs, but the pollution costs that it does to the river is not inputted into the cost calculation. And because it's not in the cost calculation, then of course the result is that you may end up with overproduction of such things. And because it's cheaper than what it should be, right? So the market will fail. We say one reason why the market fail is the market cannot correct for this, and it keeps on encouraging this kind of action on the part of the factory and on the part of the consumers. But if you put a tax on the per unit of the pollution into the river, then it becomes part of the cost to the factory, and the factory has to take that into account, and therefore it goes into the market price of the product. It becomes more expensive, and so people then reduce the consumption of those things that the factory produces, and therefore the market behaves well again. But that is through intervention by the government and intervention in policy to put a tax on this, right? So the point I'm saying is that in the case of financial appraisal, where there are so-called these type of external effects, those type of negative external effects like the pollution I just mentioned, as long as they don't have to pay for it at all, legitimately, as long as they don't have to pay, then it doesn't get counted, and the market price of the product is just taken as it is. And so in CBA, we do have to value the pollution costs done by this factory, and we have to input it into the social cost of the factory's activities. So that's another big difference between CBA and financial appraisal. Now, the other thing is that if we are concerned with things which are not priced, so you see, if there is a market price, the question is whether the market price reflects this type of social costs. So if it does not, then you have to correct them under CBA. Under the financial appraisal, you don't do anything. Now, what happens if there are no market prices at all? The one that I just talked about, congestion, noise, all right? Then what do you do? Even if you have a project that puts up something which blocks your view, the view itself has value to people, all right? So in the financial appraisal, that is not taken into account. But in the CBA, we have to take that into account. But because there's no ready market prices for it, then we have to find ways to elicit the market price, to find the price, right? And so in CBA, one important component of the subject is to try to put values on these so-called intangibles, those that don't have market prices, right? So there are two things we do. One is the correction of the market price, as in the case of the pollution type. The other is that this so-called intangibles, right? Which is not so easy to do, but we have methods in CBA to handle these these valuations and therefore derive these prices. So that's another thing which CBA does, which the normal financial appraisal don't do. Now, of course, if you are dealing with financial appraisal, they only care about profits and gains, right? Net gains. So if there is losses to the firm, and if these losses are sustained over time, then the firm will go bankrupt, right? The firm will close. So for the firms, they are very concerned about the profits. They're concerned about the right pricing. Now, in the CBA, they are not so much concerned about this. So if you have a toll, for example, which is the lower the toll, actually the higher the welfare value to society, because people pay less, consumer surplus higher, right? But in the case of the financial appraisal, if you have too low a toll, they can't even cover their maintenance costs, operational costs. So of course the firm will shut down. They cannot sustain in the long run. So again, there's a big difference between CBA and the financial appraisal. CBA's place is actually rightfully in a main part of economics. So when a student goes to study principles of economics first year at the university or in your last year in graduation from high school, when you study economics, the first thing you study is economics, is a study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing needs. And you can apply this because of scarcity. You can apply this in many aspects of allocation. It's not just allocation of the goods, but also allocation with respect to environmental things. So you think about it, the question about does all environmental problems are economic problems, and to what extent, if they are, to what extent we can use our economics toolkit to solve many of these problems. Now, if you look at a piece of land, right, a land is used for development, or the land, you keep it as it is, wild jungle, wild forested area, or you convert part of the land to be like a park for people to go and enjoy and recreation. So that piece of land can be used for many, many uses. Even dumping, right, as a landfill. So, but if you use the land for a landfill, you cannot use the land for nature parks. You cannot use the land to build houses. So this is because of the scarcity of the piece of land. So in environment, they also share the same thing, right? And so we need to assess how best to use this piece of land, for what purpose. So government will come to propose something, private sector will bid for the land, right? And so cost-benefit analysis lends itself to such kind of analysis, not so much as financial appraisal, because that piece of land is owned by society, and society, we must find how to maximize efficiency in the allocation of such pieces of land. So there is scarcity of resources, we have to make a choice. Now, how do you make the choice is usually based on foregone gains. What is the opportunity cost in using that resource for one use over other uses, right? So the individual maximizes our net satisfaction. Utility is like your satisfaction. The firm maximizes profit, and society as a whole maximizes social welfare, right? So this is a book, you are interested in the principle of economics, which I, using the Asian edition, which I wrote with Gregory Mankiw, is at Harvard University. His book has been published several editions, but this is an Asian edition infused with lots and lots of Asian examples and cases. And this just came out last year, the 3rd edition. So CBA in summary is It measures gains and losses to every one of us because we are a society. Society is people. Every one of us have values. So any proposal, program, policy, whatever, is going to affect how we look at this proposal. So it's a measure of gains and losses to all individuals in society. And for convenience, we just use money as a common denominator for measurement to aggregate all these gains and losses. There are 6 questions of CBA. When we do CBA, 6 questions that one has to answer. It's all fine to say, let's do cost and benefit, but there is a systematic process which everyone has to do. If you are doing serious and complete CBA, you have to go through these 6 steps. And there's no shortcut into the steps. So which costs and benefits are to be included? That's the first question. When somebody makes a proposal, a program, a policy, first thing, you write on a piece of paper, where are the costs, where are the benefits. Just right. Now, we are talking about society as a whole, always society as a whole. Right? We're not talking about any smaller part of it. If you want to talk about CBA with respect to a province or a state, then you must be very clear at the beginning that the target audience is the state, people in the state. Not in the case of Penang, it's Penang. Not costs and benefits with reference to Kedah or Perak or Selangor and so on. What are the gains and losses to the Penang people? So right from the very beginning, you must be clear, right? So that you don't mix up. You're doing some gains for Penang, some gains to Perak, then it becomes all jumbled up. Then there are such things as how do we deal with transfer payments and avoid double counting. So transfer payments are the state gets some money, let's say from KL, 100 million, let's say. Do we put this 100 million as a benefit or what? Well, it depends on where the 100 million is coming from. So if 100 million is subtracted from somewhere, which is designated funds for some other purpose, and it comes to Penang, then it cannot be counted as a benefit when you do the CBA. But if you say the CBA is for Penang only, then the 100 million must be a benefit. But if you say CBA is for the country as a whole, Malaysia, then it cannot be a benefit. It's just a transfer. So things like this, when you deal with taxes, right, you must be very careful which are transfers or not. Now, the other thing is double counting. Double counting, I often see this quite a lot in people making such mistakes. Let's say I have a proposal to build a road connecting A and B. When you build the road, one of the reasons why you're building a road is that you hope to reduce traveling time. You hope to reduce mileage costs in petrol usage. And perhaps you hope to reduce accidents on the road because the previous road may be quite treacherous, winding and so on. Now you have a new road being proposed. It is a direct connection between A and B. You might reduce accidents, all right? And if you reduce accidents, you're reducing injuries. You're also reducing fatalities on the road. Life is saved. So these are all benefits which you have calculated. So when you do a cost benefit, these are the 3 items that you put in. And you try to measure them with dollar values. Now, obviously, when you have the road being built, then the land prices in A or B would go up. Usually when you connect this town with a good road, right? And also rental values, business and so on, may also go up. The mistake is that people will add the rental values, the land values as a benefit on top of the benefits they calculated for the time saved, the mileage cost saved, reduction in accidents and fatalities, life saved. This is double and even triple counting. Because why are land prices increasing? It's because you have made traveling between A and B easier, so you attract more travel, right? Time is saved and less accident, right? So people are attracted now to travel more between A and B. So land prices are go up. And rental values, right, should also go up, because if rental values, land prices is a sum of the capitalization of rental values. So the two are also connected. So you just do one, you don't do all three, when you calculate the values. And the traditional way is to calculate time save, mileage save, and reduction in accidents and fatalities. That's the traditional way. All right. So another one might be clearer to you is of double counting is like government has a water project which reduces the effort, the time, and the cost for farmers to go and get water from somewhere else. So government provides a water project which now reduces the cost to farmers to get water from elsewhere. Okay. Now everything remains the same. The crops they're producing, the intensity of the cultivation of the crops, if everything remains the same. The only difference is the cost of the water usage, cost of water, getting the water is now lower than before. What will happen? The profit to the farmer should increase if everything remains the same, right? The sales and so on and so on. So now with the lower cost, they are selling the same, the profit should increase. So profit should go into your gains, right? But if you add to that component that this cost of production, cost of getting the water, right? Let's say drops by 10%. If you add this as a gain, then you're going to double count again. So that's this idea of double counting. So the first question is which costs and benefits to include? Number one, you have to be careful about the audience. Is it the state? Is it the town? Is it the country as a whole? Two is that you avoid transfer payments like taxes and subsidies. And third is avoiding double counting. So many times people make such mistakes. After you have listed out all the costs and benefits, the relevant ones, and deleted all that is not necessary or incorrect, then the second stage, how do you put a dollar value on these costs and benefits? Because every item, you need to insert a dollar value to it. So then the question is, are market prices available or are they suitable? Remember the pollution case? If you don't adjust the market prices for pollution, then the cost you're going to ascribe is lower than what it should be. So you need to adjust. If market prices are not available, then how can we obtain surrogate prices like surrogate mothers, surrogate prices, right? Can we do that? If we don't even have that, can we invent prices through hypothetical markets? So in economics, we study all these methods: contingent valuation, hedonic pricing, travel cost. But it's not for me here to explain all these methods, but basically these are the methods. Contingent valuation is a form of asking people their willingness to pay for something. Of course, with the more refinement and the question that they pose, it's not just simply asking how much you're willing to pay, but essentially it depends upon these two indicators: willingness to pay and willingness to accept. So government is going to do something good. How much? The government needs to know. I'm spending money for it. I want to know, do people actually like it or not? And if they like it, how much they're going to get out of it, right? So that's a valuation question. And how do we derive that? And one form is through this contingent valuation method. Another one is hedonic pricing, which is like your real estate values. So if my house is near to a park, or my house is near to a clean area, or not crime infested area, then the property price for the house will be higher than compared to the similar house, right, with similar characteristics, except for they are not near to a park, they are not near to a non-crime infested area, and so on. So if you go to real estate companies, they will be able to tell you the premium price, right? The price over how much the people would have to pay for all these characteristics. So hedonic pricing actually uses that concept for it. Hedonic pricing is also used to calculate, remember I said about fatalities and value of life. You build a road. The road not just save time, but save life. Suppose it saved 5 lives. What is the value of 1 life? Government builds a hospital. Hospital save life. How many lives will be saved per year? What is per life worth? Some of you may say, oh, we cannot value life. Life is precious. Really? Then I will not see anybody crossing a road. You cross the road means you have implicitly adjusted your risks. You want to cross the road for a good reason. You want to cross the road. There are gains to cross the road. That's why you cross the road. But if you cross the road, you may get knocked down by a car. But there's a very small probability of getting knocked down by a car. So in your mind, you're implicitly doing the trade-off. Changes in the risk of death, right, versus the gains. So similarly, the hedonic pricing through a proper functioning labor market can give you such values. A person who cleans a building in a tall building, right, versus another person with similar qualification cleans a building which is short. Who will get higher pay? It must be the one who cleans the tall building. You don't have to go and tell the firm and say, you have to pay higher. The market will adjust. Because if the pay is the same, everybody will flock to the short building. Nobody will work for the tall building. So the argument is that you can observe such, labor market wage differential by looking at such payments, and therefore adjusting it for risk of death. And that's how value of life is calculated. So hedonic pricing is a form of using this labor market wage differentials to derive these values. Travel cost is very useful for valuation of museums, valuation of parks, something which is fixed to a location. So we teach that all the time. And the method yields interesting values about what is the value of this building, this museum, right? That does not use hedonic pricing, does not use contingent valuation, but is based on the cost to travel to get there. Now, in many of the less developed countries, because of budget problems, they don't have a lot of indigenous studies. So when you talk about the real estate values, you talk about the hedonic pricing for labor market wage differential, they don't have a proper functioning market and so on. And there are hardly any studies done on any. So, but if you need these values, what do you do? So you do a shortcut. You look for studies done on such things in other countries. So you try to search for a city or a country that has somewhat like similar structure like here. And then you find their studies done there, and then you extract those studies. This is called benefit transfer method, which is a legitimate method. But a lot of requirements to make the transfer more appropriate. But usually, if as far as concerned, we should use indigenous studies rather than benefit transfer. And the last one is pairwise comparison. It's like if you are trying to establish preferences for people, then you can use this a survey method that makes choices available to people, right? In kind of binary. So you choose, like you ask a question, do you prefer oranges or durians? Do you prefer oranges or apples? So it's just like government asking, do you prefer talking to the farmers, the government to do something about the water supply? Or do you prefer the government to do something about electricity? Or do you prefer the government to provide fertilizers and so on, right? And so you have a list, and then the people will pick which one they want, and then from there you can construct a table, right? And then from there you can calculate the ranking of priorities or ranking of preferences. So this is another one which we use in cost-benefit analysis, where we don't need to look at dollar values, but we can look at ranking of preferences. Okay, I don't want to spend more time on that. But value of statistical life is just what previously I said. And it's extremely important because a lot of projects involves calculations of value of lives saved. Otherwise, how do you calculate you save 5 lives. What does 5 lives means? You save 1 life. What does it mean? Right. Now, this is a picture of in Penang, right? The baobab tree. It's still surviving, I saw. As a little boy, I used to see this tree, and this is a picture of that tree. What's the value of this tree? Many of the projects, whether it's a state project or government projects, involve the destruction of trees. And that's why you have environmental groups opposing to all these kind of things, right? But rather than saying the environmental groups are correct and so on, I think it's important to establish what's the value of a tree. Is the value of a tree just the wood and the timber and the lumber that you chop down, and then you find out the market price of this lumber, timber in the market, then multiply by the volume of tons that you cut down? No, because a tree has more than that. It's much more than that. For example, a tree provides historical values. The tree may have been there for a long time. It has been there and witnessed a lot of historical events. So people value a tree for that. Another reason for caring about trees is trees provide shade, and people like that. The bigger the shade they provide, people, use that as a shade. The other thing is tree provides a carbon capture, right? The carbon, and that's a part of the ecosystem, right? So a lot of people think about such things, and also their trees are beautiful. So people say, why did they cut down this tree? There's a beautiful tree, so aesthetic values. Now, so a tree is more than just lumber or timber and so on. Now, in cost-benefit analysis, we also calculate what's the value of trees. We don't just take the lumber, timber prices, right? We do all these things to try to derive the value of tree. So a project may involve tree destruction, how much tree is being cut down, what's the value of a tree, and we put it on the social cost side for the project. Number 3 is, what do we do with time period differences? Well, because you need to make a decision now about a project, a policy, a program, right? But the project lasts for a long time, and that's again another difference between financial appraisal and CBA. CBA, there's the life of a project may go 50 years, 100 years, 60 years. But financial appraisal, 5 years is quite common. In fact, few years is quite common. 10 years maybe at the most. It's a short run perspective for financial appraisal, but for the CBA it's long run. So because decisions have been made now, and because a dollar is not the same now and a dollar in the future, because you incur these costs and benefits over the future, you have to discount and debt to the present. So the method of discounting is used in the literature. How do you account for equity? Equity is like, you have a project, the project tends to benefit a certain group of people, or the project affects affect income distribution, right? It may make it worse in the sense that most of the benefit may be going to the upper class, middle income and upper class, but most of the costs, the social costs of the project going to the poorer segment of society. So CBA, some people have argued that we should take into account of such equity implications and not just efficiency. So CBA was always about efficiency, but because we care about this equity implication, then we have to think about incorporating equity into the CBA. Some CBA experts don't want to do that, so they keep this separate between equity and efficiency. It's not to confuse the two, but some would include it. So when you include it, how do you do it? One way is to use quantitative weights. So if you say that the social cost is to a poor person, when you calculate, is $100, but to a rich person, it may be nothing. But to $100 may not be $100 to a poor. So you multiply by a weight, times 4, times 3, whatever, right? And the literature teaches us what weights to ascribe to this, what kind of weights you can use for this, and the rationale behind these weights to use. So basically, it's transforming the gains and losses, right, that is appropriate to the income group of the population. And if you don't like quantitative weights, you can also use qualitative weights. In other words, when you list out your costs and benefits, you can just see from the cost without calculating anything, just look at the cost. You think, where is this cost likely to hit? Is it the poorer people or the richer people? So you're poor, you put P. Rich, you put R. So you just go item by item and you think which one will hit. And then at the end of which, you just tabulate how many R, how many P. And you find that this project has a lot of the cost hitting the poor, then it's not very good, because the impact on income distribution is going to be perverse, even though the efficiency may be good. So these are kind of questions that we deal with when we deal with equity. How do you allow for uncertainty? Uncertainty is like, because the project may last for a long time, how do you know, let me be global warming and so on, may affect the costing of the project or in the far future. So you have to adjust for uncertainty. If you think the project is very risky, very uncertain, you have to adjust. And the CBA has methods for such kinds of adjustments. And then the last one is the closest to financial appraisal, which is the investment decision criteria itself. So in financial appraisal, you will learn what is net present value, what is benefit cost ratio, what is internal rate of return. CBA uses the same thing, at the end of which we all use the same decision criteria. But we have the TV there, which is terminal values. So instead of putting all your costs and benefits evaluated, all right, at the time period, not at the beginning, the TV evaluates everything to the last year. So this is a sum up of the framework that we have to go through, the 6 steps. Okay, I don't have to repeat, but you can see from here. And some people say, well, cost-benefit analysis can be manipulated and we don't trust it. Can it be manipulated so easily? What is more important? It's not the answer to this project, program, policy, and so on. It is the steps leading to the answer. So if the steps are covered in the 6 steps, as I said, and the analysts have to go through step by step and show how they derive this, why they take out this cost, have they accounted for equity, what do they do with uncertainty? If all this is in the report, and you can scrutinize the report. Of course, if you say the government doesn't show you the report, then that's a different story, right? But most CBA reports should be available for you to look at, and you can question the assumptions, the biasness, why this, why that, of the report itself. But if the report is based on these steps, which are transparent steps, and if there's good rationale for the choice of certain variables, certain numbers, if there is good rationale, then it is reasonable to conclude that the outcome of the proposal is what it should be, as what the report has stated. We are reasonably confident, right? So that's the beauty of cost-benefit analysis, to be able to go through these steps and be able to confidently make an informed decision. So, this famous Harvard law professor, some of you may know, Cass Sunstein. Sunstein had written in one of the book called The Cost-Benefit Revolution, published recently, not long ago, where he said that, it is very important to provide a rigorous analysis on the merits and demerits of a proposal. And he thinks that, and I agree, definitely, that this is much better than relying on public opinion, interviews, petition, lobbying, political posturing, all these things for a proposed policy, project, infrastructure, whatever. It is better to have a serious cost-benefit analysis being done. That's Cass Sunstein's, he wrote in the book. Another thing I remember from reading it is that it is quite remarkable, he says, that in today's time where there's polarization between the Democrats and the Republicans in the US, that they are both agreed on one thing, which is the importance of CBA. They are both agreed on that point in trying to make informed decisions, making clear what are the costs and what are the benefits. Now, I want to touch on this, which is some of the studies that I've been involved in with Singapore. And I think they make quite interesting studies. So let me just go through this. One is the social cost of incarceration. There's a question about, should we put more people in jail? Incarceration. So if you're a criminal, should we send you more of these people to jail? Or should we think of alternatives like probation, home arrest, doing what do you call it, charitable works and volunteer work, right? Many options for penalties, right? Now, if you put somebody in jail, there's a cost. What is the cost? Cost to society, not cost to the prison authority, cost to society. So one cost is the usual cost. We have to maintain this person, the food cost, he's sick, the health cost, He has to be, they are prisoners, so we have to watch over them carefully. Security costs, right? And if the person wants to study for O levels or whatever, well, education costs. He has to have a roof over the head, right? So the maintenance of buildings and so on. So these are costs that people always think about. But there are other costs that people don't think about, and that is, if you put a person in jail, there's an opportunity cost. He is a lawyer, now he cannot practice. He is a teacher, he cannot teach. He's a doctor, now he cannot do his medical practice. Things like that. He's a tailor, he cannot tailor. So the point is that these are also costs to society by putting the person there, right? And then there's another third cost which people also seldom talk about, which is, and prison authorities know this cost very well. Let's say I'm a robber, I rob homes. Now I get caught after the third day, okay? So I'm sent to prison. And in the prison, I meet another robber and we exchange greetings. And the robber says, well, we are both robbing, but it took 10 years for me to get caught. So the first robber, me, I would perk up my ears. What? You got caught after 10 years? I got caught after 3 days. So you are an experienced robber. You know all the secrets to robbing and how to get away with it. So they will share notes, right? And so the result is that because I'm a 3-day robber, I got caught early, I'm released early. So I come out, I'm a better robber. I will rob more homes. Now, this is a serious thing, and prison authorities know this very well, and they try their best to separate these prisoners. But it's not possible to do a complete separation because they meet out in the courtyard, they have they eat out, and things like this. It's not so easy. But these are costs to society by a sort of a human capital investment in a negative way that will inflict more damages to society after they get out. So these are things. Now, why are we interested in this cost of incarceration? We are interested because we need to know what is the cost of society of incarcerating, sending more people to jail versus the alternative. All right? And so you have to calculate this social cost of society first before you talk about the other alternatives. I'm not covering everything, but I'm just speeding along. Similarly, for crimes, there are many types of crimes out there society face. Some are serious ones like battery, assault, and more serious is murder, right? And then there are petty thefts and robbing. Each different types of crime has different costs to society. If you murder somebody, you are causing the loss of life. What is the value of a lost life? We have to calculate. Versus, so then you will know in a society how many lives were lost. What is per value life? And then you compare it to the assault, the robbing, and all these things, right? Property damage is another one. So the police are always concerned that because they have limited budget to spend, they cannot try to do everything, try to combat every crime, although it is their function to combat, but they know, again, because of economics, scarce resources, they have to make choices. So they will have to prioritize which crime is more important to them. So they will then, if you use CBA, we'll be able to tell you which crime that you should be targeting. And of course, you should be targeting the crime that has the highest cost inflicted on society, right? So that's another thing that we do. Dengue. Now this one, this is a newspaper cutting from the Straits Times. And this is like a shocking number, Dengue cost Singapore 25,000 every hour in that year. This is meant to shock people. And so we are actually going through a dengue period now in Singapore, and many people are down with dengue, one of the highest in years. So here is where the Ministry of Environment wants to know. I'm spending so much money to combat dengue. I send people down to spray. Manpower costs involved. I buy sprays, use a spray. My spray may damage some property. These are all costs that I incur. The question is, do you think that this is worth it? That's the question. Then again, CBA can be used because you can calculate how much they are spending to combat dengue and what are the returns they get. The return will be less dengue, right? Less incidence of dengue. And what is the less incidence of dengue mean? It means that compared to before, less people are bitten by the mosquito, therefore they fall sick less. How many people are less affected, right? And with that number, then what is the cost of treatment, medical costs, health costs? What is the cost of productivity losses? So when you're down with dengue, you are sick, you cannot go and work, or you're working, your productivity drops significantly. These are all costs to society. Your waiting time to see the doctor is also cost to society. If you can find out all these costs, tabulate them, you can compare that with the cost to control dengue. And you can do it for a number of years to see your investment returns. Air pollution. Air pollution is another interesting one. Some years ago, not that long ago, the WHO guidelines on health or air quality was changed. And Singapore, like many countries, was affected because we are well above, well complying to the WHO guidelines. But when they make it more stringent and raise the level of air quality, then we are off. But fortunately, they provided interim levels. There are 5 interim levels to reach the ultimate one. So each country has to decide, do you want to reach this ultimate one, or do you want to reach level 3 or level 2? Now, this is not an easy question, because, well, what is the cost of reaching interim level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on? So what is the cost? Well, if you're going to have tighter better air quality, the government has to come down very hard on people who violate, let's say, traffic, the traffic pollution, right? Black smoke and so on, tighten up. They have to rate factories to ensure that they don't overdo the sulfur dioxide emissions, right? So enforcement costs will go up, and all these costs will go up. This cost will affect business costs. It will also affect us, the ordinary layperson, when we drive a car, when we eat out, or when we buy some things. All the costs will go up because of the stringency of the air quality being imposed on all these factories and individuals, right? There's another cost. The cost is that if you were to follow the WHO guidelines and other countries don't follow, then what happens? Your competitiveness will be affected. Your goods that you sell will be more expensive. Though in terms of the competitiveness, you will drop. So Singapore, like any country, faced with this question, have to think very carefully. Is it worth it to meet the WHO guidelines by spending incurring this cost versus the gains? What is the gain? The gain is that you have cleaner air. What does cleaner air means? It means that people are healthier. Healthier means more productive. See less doctor, incur less medical costs. All these things can be calculated, and then you're just comparing this amount with what the compliance cost would be. So this is another thing that we can do. Gaming. Gaming has to do like casino gaming. Should we have the casino or not? It's not just building the casino, but casino carries its cost. And what is the cost? The cost will be maybe those people who are addicted to gambling. There will always be people who are addicted to gambling. So they spend a lot of time away from their work, their normal, regular work. What does that mean? Productivity will go down for the country if a lot more people are addicted to gaming, right? How about families? If the person is addicted to gaming, then you spend all the time in the casino. When you go back, if he lose or he'll be in bad mood, it'll be causing conflicts within the family, and that leads to dysfunctional family. Divorces will happen, right? Children will be neglected, nutrition will be affected. All this you can calculate as well. How many will be affected? So these are the one cost of gaming. The other cost is syndicates. Those crimes, illegal crimes. You can also calculate that. So if you calculate all these costs, then you can compare that to the gains from having the casino, which is the revenue earner, for example. Another one is recreational pastime. Many people are not addicted to gaming. They just like any recreational pursuit. They go to gambling for fun. And the associated multiplier benefits to business and hotels. So all this can be calculated. So CPA also lends itself to such things. MRT barriers. MRT barriers, in Singapore, in let's say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, some stations has a wall at the track there. So you queue up behind the wall, right? And in orderly fashion, you get to the train. But some stations have no walls. So the MRT is concerned that it's better to have a wall because the wall ensures that people are orderly when they got on board the train, got off the train. The wall prevents accidents from happening. Accidentally pushed the person down to the track, the person suffers injuries, the person dies. So if you injury or die, you can calculate the cost. So they're thinking of why not have the MRT barrier. And another thing is that people, for some reason, there will always be suicides. People like to jump on the MRT track. I don't know why they prefer MRT, but it does happen every year, all right? And so the question is, should we build a wall? And the answer depends upon, well, what is the social cost versus the social gain? So the social cost will be, what will happen? If you have the wall and people are orderly, it means that the get on board and coming off the train will be slower. So there is a slower time in which the train will operate and people may be upset. So, but they calculate by how much is slower for each station and so on because of this wall, and how much that time corresponds to lost productivity. They can calculate. And then injuries and death, they can calculate per year, right? So they can do all these things. And versus the cost of the MRT itself, the wall itself. So the wall can be a low wall, can be a middle wall, could be a high wall. And what type of wall, what material, all this affects the cost of having that wall, to build that wall, versus the gains. The gains will be saving lives, reducing injuries, and so on, right? Yeah. How much time do they have? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Let's see. Oh, let me just finish in 10 minutes now. And these are other subjects which I was involved in. Gardens by the Bay, many of you have been to Singapore, right? So the cost to build these gardens by the bay, but people derive aesthetic value, leisure value, recreational value, tourism earner. These are the gains. Arts and culture. The one ministry is usually in charge. In the case of Singapore, I think is the Ministry of National Development at one time. They are in charge of arts and culture. So the Esplanade, for example, the one that looks like a durian building in Singapore, is used for concerts, dancers, and so on. Then there's an art museum. Then there is a National Museum. Then there is an art gallery. Then there's the Asian Civilization Museum. Then there's a Peranakan Museum. All kinds. So one offers fine arts, one offers the moving arts, one offers painting and sculptures, and there are all kinds. So the ministry is often inundated by these statutory boards, and these statutory boards, each responsible for one thing they're providing, will come to the ministry and says, we need money. Singaporeans and tourists love sculptures and paintings. That's why you have to allocate more of your budget to us. And another one will say, no, people come to enjoy the National Museum. Old artifacts, the historical things. So how does the ministry allocate the budget in such a way to correspond to the priorities of the people? That's valuation. And in valuation, in CBA, we also using contingent valuation as one of the methods. National Stadium and Sports Hub is like an old stadium at Kallang, as you remember, some of you may know. The question at the time was, should we tear it down? Should we relocate it? Right? So these, again, are questions alienable for CBA. And flooding and flood damages are very common. Any given time, in Malaysia also have a lot of floods, Singapore also have a flood. Flooding will destroy property, flooding will cause traffic congestion, flooding will result in lost productivity, flooding in some countries may result in diseases. So all these are the cause of flooding. If you can estimate all these things, then these become your gains if you were to reduce them. So how do you reduce them? Better drainage system, better monitoring system. All these things are costly. So the question to the government is, should I be spending all these things? And in return, would I get a reduction by how much of the flood and how much this would gains to society if we were to do that? All right. So these again are interesting questions for CBA. Now, I want to talk about just related. I talk about pollution just now. Many of you, when you read the media, you only read about damages from pollution. You know, pollution is bad for health. Pollution damages the building, pollution, this and that. But that's only one side of the question. The other side is we have to spend money to combat pollution. It's just like crime. Crime causes a lot of damages, inflict a lot of cost to society. So we spend money to combat the crime. So it's always two costs involved. One is the cost of the damage itself. The other is the cost of preventing the damage. Society incurs these two costs. So CBA is used to look at, well, are we overspending or are we underspending? You don't want to go in. If your crime rate in the country is very low, already, sure, you can reduce the crime more, sure. But you're going to spend a lot of money to try to bring down the level by even more. And what is the gain? The gain is very little, right? So there are always comparison between these two costs in CBA, and it's the total cost that matters. The haze, we always face the haze. Haze brings a lot of damages to a country. If you can compute these damages, then and you do it regularly, then you know which sector of the haze episode gets hit the most. Therefore, government can direct resources to reduce that sector's impacts. Or governments like Malaysia and Singapore, they're helping Indonesia. So you know that it's a sovereignty issue. It's not like pollution in the country. You can impose taxes, they are forced to comply, then pollution goes down. There's no way Singapore and Malaysia can introduce taxes for Indonesia because Indonesia is a sovereign country, different jurisdiction. But if Malaysia and Singapore as a victim countries want to help Indonesia by providing resources and money and so on, the question to the government here is, how much should I be providing? That's the question. And how much you should be providing depends very much on how much is the damage that this haze caused on your economy, on your people. So you have to calculate all these things to ensure that you make informed decisions, that you don't overgive or undergive. This one I will skip. This is what we do when I talk to my undergraduates. This part is important, I think, when you do CBA. Many people always underestimate. We have to do valuation. All of us have values for every project, but nobody comes to us and asks, how does the project affect you? By how much would you be, impacted? How much you'd be willing to pay to avoid it? Or how much do you think you should be compensated for bearing up with it? So again, you take a transport project, builds a station at a neighborhood, right? And while it is building, and also when it's operating, this station is going to cause a lot of noise. It's going to cause vibration. It's going to cause people congestion. And you live near there. You are affected. So a CBA requires to do a valuation of these negative costs to you. And therefore, with the establishment of these damages, then you can talk about whether the project is still positive or negative by including these damages in, or if they are included, then you can talk about how much must the operator pay you to make you accept these damages, to alleviate, to reduce that cost to you. So only if you do such valuation, you'll be able to take care of such interest. Otherwise, if you don't bother, then you were just talking about bearing up with it. You're talking about an engineering cost and so on. That's incomplete. The other thing is that, another important thing is that, every time when people propose projects, and if people don't like it, then the Nature Society or some other society will go around and collect signatures or petition. I'm sure you know this. So we just sign. Let's say I have 100,000 people, I got petition. But then the country has how many? The population is how many? Millions. What does 100,000 show anything? It doesn't show anything. So you need valuation, because valuation allows you to get an intensity of preferences, how strongly you feel for something, right? And not just getting numbers. And the other thing is, you need valuation in dollar terms, simply that you can compare. So a commercial value tells you in dollar terms. The saving of species, protecting the forest area, reducing pollution, carbon emission, protecting ecosystem. All these things have values, right? But these values are not in dollar terms, not readily available. But the commercial developers can tell you that if you free up this land, we'll be able to convert it into such and such, and every year you generate revenue such and such, and out of this revenue we pay taxes such and such. That's clear. But on the other side, it's not clear. Therefore, you need valuation and you need cost-benefit analysis for you to ensure that your governments make the right decision and not just simply designate it to a committee. And the committee will just, based on what they think, subjective valuation on it, and arrive at the answer. Why should the committee's way of thinking be much better than a normal CBA? CBA is not perfect, for sure. But a CBA takes you through this systematic process. And in that way, you're more confident of the answer of the allocation of that resource compared to one that depends on a committee of 10 people deciding. Why should that be the way? And why should you just go around and ask people the public opinion as well? Of course you should. But why should that dictate the allocation of an important resource allocation? And then this last one about the concept of use and non-use. You learn in textbooks when you say demand, and when you talk about demand, there's use demand. In other words, I buy something, I'm a user. I go to visit this garden, this park, I'm a user. What about people who don't go there? People who reserve, maybe the time is not right. When I retire, I have more time, I will go and visit this historical site. I will go and visit this forest area, this park. What about people who believe that my country or the world will be a better place if we don't do anything to this area, we leave it for future generation? These are what we call the non-use value. But when you conduct surveys, it's always about use value. And therefore, use value is only a subset of the total value. So again, in CBA, we also estimate the non-use values. I think I will probably tell this the last story about the wombat. This is an Australian creature called the wombat. You know, when you, it's a real story. This is a farmer who wants to sell his land, and there was a ready commercial developer who is ready to buy the land. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the farmer has this creature called the habitat of this creature lies on his land. And there are only 3 habitats, or 3 or 4 in Australia, which still has the habitat. Unfortunately, a farmer is one of them. Farmer is eager to sell the land to the commercial developer who dangles this X dollars. Now, the Nature Society of Australia did something quite different. Instead of just getting people to sign petition against the purchase of selling this land, the Nature Society of Australia went around and asked people and said, tell them the story about this wombat, and then tell them that we are going to ask you, how are you willing to contribute some money to a trust fund, which we hope that if we have enough money, we can compete with the commercial developer and bid for that land. Now, this is remarkable. And this Nature Society of Australia didn't stop just at New South Wales. They went to South Australia, they went to Queensland, they went to Western Australia and asked the same question. Now, they also don't ask the same question. They don't ask just the individuals like you and I. They also ask companies and firms and organizations. So, for example, if you are the HSBC Bank, who cares for nature, they might be prepared to pay hundreds of thousands or contribute to the trust fund. So in the end, they got quite a lot of money collected in the trust fund, substantially more than enough to outbid the commercial developer and even pay more to the farmer to make him happy so that they retain the piece of land for the protection of the wombats. Now notice the moral of the story is this. There is one organization, one entity who is willing to go around and collect these values. I said all of us have values, but no one come to us for any development of projects involving important things like this. This one, they went to everyone, individuals and corporations. 2, they don't look at use value. They also go to non-use value. So they went around the other states, and even they can, people have never seen or don't want to be recreating with a wombat, right? But these people are still willing to pay something. They said their future generation will be better off having these creatures around and surviving creatures, right? So that's going for non-use values in addition to use values. And thirdly, the third part of the moral story is we always have a ready presumption. Talk to any person in the street. They will say, oh, developer will sure win. That's nonsense. In the literature, if you look carefully of studies, you can find lots of studies which showed that a non-commercial project may even outbid the commercial project. So in this case, the Wombats case, it has been proven that if you have these necessary steps and this necessary action taken, in this case by the organization Nature Society Australia, doing this way, the values obtained could be even higher than the commercial values offered by a private developer, right? So this is an important 3 moral steps of the story. Okay, I want to stop here. I think my slides are available if those people want to talk, because it's almost 5:30 now. I know the time. Yeah, so the whole thing is this. The whole point is this. We want to make informed decisions. And cost-benefit analysis is one way, important way to make that informed decision through efficiency. But if you're concerned about equity, you can incorporate equity. And there are steps. It's the steps taken to reach the solution, and not the solution itself that is important. And there's valuation. Things which are seemingly non-commercial has values to society. We should incorporate as far as possible for these values so that we don't just decide on the basis of what is measurable only and forget about those non-measurable. Okay? So these are things is important. These are some of the, if you're interested in bedtime reading or you're taking the bus, some of the articles that are written for the past few years, and these are easy to read articles. They're mostly in Straits Times and so on, and pieces involving and related to CBA. And of course, the books. If you're interested, the books, go and get them, download them online. You know, there's an e-book as well. The latest is the first one in blue, which just published, came out last year. But that's more theoretical. The second one is application, case studies, 22 case studies in Asia, applying CBA. Third one is applying CBA as one technique in making sustainable decision making. And this one is just came out last week, but it's not CBA, about the life and the contribution of the Dutch economist. But you can see in some aspects, especially on the environment chapter, how the CBA fits in to his thinking, even though it's not explicit. All right, so I think I hope in this short 1.5 hours that I managed to convince you the importance of making informed decisions through one important tool in economics, which is cost-benefit analysis. It has faults, has limitations. If you check up, lots of limitations as well. But at least, as I said, it is a more rigorous method, right? And if you're aware of these limitations, there are ways to counter these limitations, address them, right? Or if you cannot, then you acknowledge this to the decision maker so that they make the right decisions. Think about the alternative. Think about the alternative to CBA, which is much, I think, in my mind, inferior. People like to say about EIA, Environment Impact Analysis. That is not CBA. That is looking at the physical impact of a project, the physical impact without translating in dollar and cents. So CBA goes a step further, right? And so on. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Euston. Would you mind taking half an hour of questions? Okay. Well, I got the last of Euston's book for free. The rest of you have to buy it. Thank you so much for a very, very comprehensive lesson, I would call it. You can tell from how I took notes that they're all quite mixed up as well, because the subject touched on so many things. But I'll start the questioning, if you don't mind, by perhaps trying to simplify all the points I wanted to make by asking you, Euston, what are the major criticisms in your view that have been forwarded against the CBA approach?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I've addressed some of these, basically. One is, of course, the CBA's main concern is efficiency questions. That has always been the dominant part of CBA. But actually, so the argument is that it doesn't address equity enough. That in some sense is I wouldn't say it's totally correct also, because we do address, equity came later, but how do we address it through these weights? The question is, of course, selection of weights. So how do you select the weights? That's important. So, for example, you can have formulas that say, well, a poor man's should be given more weightage if it affects them in benefits or affect them in cost. All right. So how do they have a formula like A over A is equal to Y over bar Y over Y, right? So in other words, Y is the income. So if you take a case of a poor person, the income of the person is small, very small relative to the rest of the average of the country. So for this person, then when you have that formula, right, which is bar Y over Y, then that weight will be given much heavier in the case for the poor people compared to rich people. Another way is to look at the country's progressive income taxation. So as you know, you get richer, you are taxed more. So how does we don't have to worry about how you derive these weights. You just follow the country's taxation formula, right? So you're taxed more and more, and how much more, and that is built into the category for the income, and so on and so forth. If you don't like all these things, as I said, you can just use a qualitative way of addressing it. So put the R and the P, I said, along the benefits and costs, tabulate how many R, tabulate how many P. Although it's rudimentary, but at least you get a quick overview on what this project does to that. Finally, if you're not satisfied with all this, you can treat CBA separate. Now, as you do an efficiency analysis one side, and then the other one you do equity analysis from other methods.
Thank you.
Okay.
One more question from you, from me. If I'm thinking, it's a sort of whole of society approach, really, right, with CBA.
Yes.
So meaning usually that it's a country or society that is rather technocratic, which can then allow for such rationalizing of big decisions. I suppose one can see that there is a lower limit to it, that certain, if it's too small a project, you can forget about the CBA. But is there an upper level to it?
Well, if it's a straightforward commercial project, usually financial appraisal is perhaps more than enough, right? But if you have a project that encompasses nature, that it affects nature, it affects wildlife, flora, fauna, it affects, as I said, even the damages done to aesthetic values. Some people, when they build a project, they're going to, project is so massive and it's going to just block out a nice view, for example. So the view is a loss. It's lost as a result of the project. So you have to use methods to compute what is this value of the view that is now lost and put it into the CBA. So in such cases where you have lots of this so-called non-market intangibles involved in the particular project, then you will want to use CBA. But if they are straightforward, like let's say a commercial property in downtown, a land in downtown which the government is selling it for highest bidder, then if it's just a straightforward middle of town, together other buildings, then it's not really important to have that CBA.
If I may respond to that, in Penang, I think it's a common phenomenon of people losing their view, as it were, because new buildings turn up and all that. So the usual, accepted explanation, I suppose, is that, okay, I lost my view, but then I didn't buy it either. It's sort of unearned benefit, and then you lose it because someone else builds in front of you. Would the CBA?
Well, because society is involved, not just for that person, but society as a whole. So the question is, does society feel strongly about the loss in that view, which you may call it unearned, but it belongs to society actually. So if that property, that's the so-called intangible property, is now taken away, by commercial users, for example, surely they must pay, they must compensate society in whatever form. Anyway, I want to add to this, since you talk about views, this type of question. In the short 1 week that I was here in Penang. So I had opportunities to travel around, right? My friends took me around. And one of the observations I made was a lot of dilapidated buildings, which have historical values, beautiful buildings in the past, which has historical significance. But the building is now left as it is. So the building is cracking, the building is, trees are growing out of it and so on. And everybody says, oh, that's terrible, Now, how is it related to CBA? It is important because there is such thing as impact which affects society, right? So if I have a nice garden, so I took great pains to plant roses, plant orchids, and so people who come by this place say, "Oh, what a beautiful garden!" And my happiness increases whenever I see the garden. That's just one. Second thing is people who live around your area, the property price will go up because they have a beautiful garden located in the vicinity. Now, in the case of those dilapidated buildings, right, it's the opposite case. It's a sore thumb, and it's going to impact the business and the property around it, right? So in the case of the roses garden, the way we solve it is that we want more of this being produced by society, but because the people producing it doesn't really get compensated enough, right? Same thing here. This is the sore thumb. The sore thumb affects societies, and there must be a way to tax the owners to pay for this, to compensate society for having this sore thumb around, and that will speed up the process of doing something to that dilapidated building. There's just too many, I thought.
Yeah. I've loads of questions, but I think I better shut up for now and open to the floor. Any questions? We have about 20 minutes.
Really?
Yes.
Professor Euston, I was rather kind of excited when you mentioned about air pollution, especially in Singapore. Singapore being the third largest refinery in the world. Anyway, whatever it is, solar panels were already introduced in 1980s, and Reaganomics, because of the oil baron and whatever stockpile of oil that America is having, right? Now we are at the stage of Bidenomics, because Elon Musk was not invited to the summit of the future electric car industry in America, in US. My question is, cars are getting more and more and more in Singapore. More and more and more kilometers of highway are being built. But Singapore is very silent on electrical vehicles. Is there any, is the Singapore government benefiting or profit, like what you said, analyzing on whether to go big change on this electrical vehicle thing?
Okay, there are two responses to you. One is that this talk today is about the use of cost-benefit analysis as a tool for informed decision making. So I'm not talking about environmental economics per se. This is not an environmental topic talk. But I know exactly what you're saying, but the only thing that can be related to what you're saying is that before you have refineries, now you have refineries, right? So what does the refineries do to your country? So it's a revenue earner. It creates jobs, employment, income. It provides opportunity for the country to grow economically and so on. And this happened back in the 60s, right? Then the question is, well, now that the country is quite developed and so on, do you build more refineries? And I don't think Singapore is building more refineries for that. And we actually implemented, if you look at the past few years, we are moving at quite good speed to invest in green energy and so on. Now, people don't appreciate that that in the case of Singapore, we are a renewable energy deficient country. We are not like any normal country that we can rely on tidal wave, hydroelectric. So solar power is they even tried wind power on Pulau Ubin to test out the velocity of the wind. It doesn't work. We don't have enough wind. So we have no tidal wave, no wind, cannot have any dams. And so we toy around with solar energy. But the amount of the amount of energy that we need using solar panel is totally insufficient. They contribute maybe up to 16 or 18% only of our daily needs. Why? Because the technology is still not there. So China has lowered the price of solar panel. That's fine. But the technology of storage is still not there. And so they estimate that maybe towards the end of this century, later part of the century, then the storage capacity, can increase. We don't want a situation where we transit so fast everything to this solar. The result is that we don't have enough energy to power the industry, power our daily needs, power the housing needs. All these things are also important to society. So I understand this concern about pollution as well. So as I said, there are two costs to it. Then one has to look at it very carefully. So unless the storage capacity has progressed to such a stage that we're able to supply at least 3/4 of our needs, then I don't think that one could just charge ahead with all this green energy renewables, which will take time. Now, regarding electric vehicles that you mentioned, actually government is very serious. They already said by the year 2040, there'll be all the fossil fuel cars will be phased out. All will go electricity. And they have started to implement about installation of charging stations. The question is how many to provide, and so on and so forth. And government is now leading the way about installation of these chargers. I don't know eventually whether they're able to achieve it, because to achieve an economy that's full of electric vehicles requires much more than just switching to the electric vehicles and just installation. Now, if you are for those green lobby groups, a green person, right? Think about what happens to the disposal of the battery. It's an issue which nobody talks much about. So suddenly every vehicle is electric. Then what do you do with the disposal of the battery? They have no clear solutions for the case of Singapore yet. So I always say that we try our best to be in line with what's good and trending, But at the same time, we must be cognizant of the cost to us, and we must be aware. Each country is different. Each stage of development is different. Their needs are different. So all these things lends itself again to the cost and benefit to evaluate these various alternatives. And how fast we go also can be done. Right? I don't know whether this answers your question, but it's around, I think I related to your question.
Okay. Next question. And I think there's a whole row of people wishing to ask. Can you wait your turn perhaps?
Or would Singapore consider going nuclear?
No, definitely not. We want to study a little bit, understand the nuclear. I don't think so, because we are a small country with limited land space. So where do we put the nuclear? If anything happens, there will fall out. Where do we go? Very dangerous. So one solution, the only possible solution, is to locate the nuclear outside mainland Singapore. So one of the offshore islands, right? But then you worry, if there's something happen, you will contaminate the sea. So all these things makes it very, 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 very unlikely that we will ever have nuclear. But we need to understand maybe small nuclear facilities, not the big ones. But the region is going nuclear. I think Vietnam is going to, at least at one stage, 20 to 30 nuclear reactors being built there, right?
a CBA on that would not be easy on whether to go nuclear.
Yeah, another unusual thing about nuclear is that the waste that they produce from nuclear, there is a cost to the future generation.
Yeah.
Now, so if you do CBA, we might say, well, the cost will be very far away, So it is going to be a future generation problem, not a problem today. So if you do the CBA and you use the discounting process, the cost far away you bring to making a decision today will be very small compared to the benefit, and therefore it tends to favor nuclear in that sense, right? So there is a problem with that kind of. You mentioned a limitation. There's one limitation. How do you deal with intergenerational equity issues in CBA? Not easy. So one way that has been discussed in literature is to make the present generation, the successive governments, to put into some kind of trust fund again, and when it comes to the future, then they will draw from this trust fund to pay for whatever cost they incur in the future generation. So they keep piling up the funds now until to be used by a future generation. But it's also not easy because along the way, some future governments may change the game, and then you have a problem. So it's an issue which you are correct. You bring up. It is an issue that is a limitation of the CBA.
Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Professor. I'm Eddie Lee from MUST University. I'd like to take your view on looking at the CBA from a political lens. For example, political lens. For example, like look at the South China Sea disputes. So we have so many claimants like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia. And then compare Malaysia and Philippines. Philippines probably make most noises, in terms of claiming their right. And Malaysia is relatively making less noises. So what do you think? Is it kind of any better for Malaysia for that matters? Thank you.
Yeah, but this is not really a CBA type of question. This is a political economy type of question. And I don't think I have particular views here, and neither are my views scientific, because the way we analyze this is not through CBA, right? It's more on the political science, political analysis issues, not so much as CBA. CBA works well when you have a very defined object. So you have let's say you have an infrastructure. You clearly define the infrastructure, and it lends very well to that kind of analysis. Or you have a poverty program. What does it do? And so on. And it lends itself very well. But if you're talking about having this kind of South China Sea disputes between countries and so on, that's very difficult for CBA to answer that type of questions. So I'm afraid I can have no answer for you.
May I just here perhaps also use a political lens on something closer to a CBA? I think you're totally right in mentioning the 6 points, and that the great benefit of the CBA is that you have these 6 points, you rationalize them, and everything becomes transparent, right? And it is that one should be looking at, and not even the end results, because then you can discuss things here. So for the technocrat, for the economists, it's about cost benefit and the result and the orientation towards that. But but all this happens under a political leadership in most cases. So from what I understand, in politics, okay, there's a decision made, and so the CBA thing is done. But for the political class, it's equally important that whatever decisions they had made that led to the CBA is not shown to be wrong. You know what I mean? So there is a tension between the technocrat coming up with all the figures and the political class having made the decision and not wanting to back down. In your experience, would that be a major problem in CBA?
No, I don't think there's a major problem, because the way most of us in the field look at CBA is that we are doing CBA analysis for, let's say, for government. we are focusing on a particular thing, all right, as I said, object, and we're analyzing the cost and benefits of that object or that proposal, right? Given the market prices, given the income distribution of the country at that point in time. So to the best of our knowledge and information at the time, we will then present it to the user. But at the same time, in CBA, we have one topic which is called sensitivity analysis. So we can plug in different values based on, let's say if it's an uncertainty, then we think that it may take 3 values, then we will try the 3 values. Nothing else changes except the 3. And we see whether the results change or not. So, but my point is that we present all these technical ways of doing things to the decision maker, which is, as you say, is the political leader of the day. And we don't get involved in making the decision for him or for her, right? Now, that is correct because whoever is the political leader or the government or decision maker, they would have more information and more concerns than a particular object or particular program that we're evaluating. So good neighborliness, right, and so on, wishing to return a favor in the past, all these could be reasons which is not part of our CBA. So there's a technical CBA, there's all the other considerations which is non-CBA in nature. And so the government or decision maker would have this information, but we may not have. So the government needs to look at all this holistically in totality. So CBA answers the question primarily on efficiency in resource allocation, given your budget, given your constraint, right? It doesn't answer more things than that. And that's why one view is that we don't get involved in this. But another view is that because you know a lot about CBA, you should advise the government accordingly. But I don't hold that view.
Okay. Okay. So the CBA report doesn't end with a list of recommendations. It's just giving the facts, right?
The facts on what is being evaluated.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there was a. Okay.
Hi, I'm Philip. Professor, my question is actually in societies and political regimes where we are still functioning at the level of CEA. And a lot of project contention in the public is about whether this project is overpriced or not, and are we paying too much for it, and there's whatever hanky-panky is going on. There's a lot of contention about whether the EIA is properly done or is it deliberately skewed or what. We are still, in many societies, not only ourselves, we are still operating at that level. And another thing that that stood out in your presentation is your distinction between CBA and private investment analysis. And that also has another dimension when it comes to societies like ours, where we are so heavily privatized that every project that's being done or assessed right now would be from the private sector perspective anyway, because it's privatized. So my question is, how does CBA gain a viable foothold in proper practice, in good practice, in governance, etc., in a society such as ours?
CBA answers the question, why are we doing it? That's the basic question. So it answers in terms of efficiency in the resource allocation and the scarcity of the budget and so on and so forth, right? So CEA does not. CEA just makes either it's a political decision or decision has been made, is done. So I think CEA is incomplete in that sense, right? But I can understand that. I can understand why CEA is a preferred mode, because CEA is much easier to do compared to CBA. So CBA requires, as I said, more of the valuation issues, more of the calculation of social cost issues, looking at the benefits in return, in non-financial return. So it's in addition to the financial returns, what are the non-financial returns, which the CBA does. But CA does not do any of these. So CBA is particularly useful for countries which are very poor, especially. So they have very tight budget, and then they have no time to conduct a proper CBA. You know, CBA is not done overnight or over a few months. CBA is very involved. All this valuation I talked about requires expertise, requires time, requires resources. Poor countries or developing countries may want to avoid doing all this and just focus on what they think are important priorities for their society at that given point in time. So they focus on these priorities, and therefore then they decide, given our limited budget, how much we should we use to achieve what we had prioritized, right? So it's a ranking of this, what they think are important for the country. But I would say that all countries gravitate towards CBA. And I saw that in some countries, including Singapore, which is a wealthier country and so on. CBA become very important. And for the simple reason that there's a lot of demand for, even if you are rich, there's a lot of demand for your budget. Every ministry wants money from the central government, from the finance ministry. How do you justify all this allocation of the budget for so many things that they're coming up with? So a country needs to consider the value of introducing this particular program or project. But when they are starting out, they have no time to think about all these things. They just have a few priorities. They need to fulfill it and need to find the cheapest way to do it. And that's where the CEA comes in useful. I'm not saying CEA is being abandoned or something. CEA is still used in Singapore, of course, right? But it's a different context. And it goes back to Ki Beng's question about in what context. Well, in the context where it's straightforward. There's not much nature involved, not much of those intangible impact involved. Then you can even use a straight CA.
Thank you. I think the gentleman at the back has been waiting a long time, guys.
Thank you, Professor. Has the Singapore government applied the CBA analysis on the water supply problem between Malaysia and Singapore? Now and then there are hiccups claiming Malaysia says that it's underpriced. Singapore says that it's overpriced. So actually, what is the real true cost to the Singapore public? And related to this is what is your general Singapore policy on food security and water self-sufficiency? Thank you.
Well, as you know, Singapore is constrained in many things. So one of the things is, of course, they have food security issues and they have water security issues. But I think Singapore has done quite a good job because there are alternatives now to relying on just one or two sources of the water supply. Of course, Malaysia continues to be a main source of the water supply, but that dependency on Malaysia has dropped quite a lot with the arrival of the new technology in new water investment, and that's done very well. And some countries in Saudi Arabia and so on are also interested in our new water technologies. So that has come a long way to reduce this dependency on one country's supply. So when they do the CBA, I'm not involved in that, but I would imagine that when they do the CBA, I think the CBA is in terms of different types of supplies of water rather than focusing on what happens. CBA is not used to focus on what happens if there's a disruption of the water supply from Malaysia to Singapore. That's a different type of question. But in terms of different alternatives to give water supply, then with the available technology, available budget, then which technology they should go for, or just still dependent on the supply of water from Malaysia. So that CBA can be used.
Tony, your question.
My question is this: so after doing CBA and then you understand the cost, for a policymaker, at what point does it justify an intervention measure such as banning something? So, for example, banning chewing gum, for example. So at what point of that cost does it justify an intervention measure such as banning something?
But CBA is not stagnated in time. There are two things. There is a prior CBA, which is actually the standard CBA, which I just talked about. And there's a post-CBA. Post-CBA means the program, the policy, the infrastructure has already been built, right? Now, the difference between the post and the prior is that the prior, we are based a lot on estimation, projection, estimation, simulation, all these things. But the post is that you already have it. So now you have real data, and therefore you can collect all this real data now, actual data, and see whether it fits and still conform to your expectations and your estimation in the prior CBA, and therefore you get lessons out of that. Now, if the post CBA shows that this costs far outweigh the benefits, then it itself gives an informed decision, information to policymakers to change the direction and so on. Now, I don't know about chewing gum, but certainly there are many policies which the Singapore government has also changed and based on new information that they obtain. But I'm not saying everything is based on the CBA. Not everything is the CBA, but there is such thing as a post-CBA, as a prior CBA. And I think it's good to do sometimes a post-CBA, because then we realize that perhaps, and this answers Philip's question, that we have always consistently underestimated the cost and so on. This post-CBA tells you we're always underestimating by, let's say, 5 times. Then you can project to the next project, similar type. Then we will have the cost. Then we can make a sensitivity analysis times 5. And then you see, and so on and so forth. So there are many variations of the CBA, but what I told you is a standard variation for a proposal. I think it's important now. Basically, to me, I keep going to this point, which is that think about this. If you don't have CBA, how you arrive at good decisions, informed decision. Certain rules of thumb, heuristic rules of thumb, maybe based on intuition. Why should that be a better way of making decisions than the systematic way? Even though the systematic way may have some problems and weakness, but if you think that, let's say, if you use the discount rate, if you think, oh, he's using the long one, it's always 3, then you can try 3, 4, 5, right? Uncertainty, if you think that global warming is going to affect this by a factor of 5, try it. Factor of 5, factor of 6, factor of 7. You can try all these things. The point is that you are, as long as you are reasonable in your estimation, if you are reasonable in the choice of what goes into that variable, that's fine. I think the answers are much. I feel more comfortable and confident that the solution derived from the CBA exercise much better than one that is based on just intuition or committee decision or petition. That's how I feel. But there are limitations CBA, we are aware of that, and there are other concerns besides CBA which we may not be aware, but it's for the decision maker to decide.
I think we have to stop here and thank Euston for a fantastically interesting 2 hours. Please join me in thanking him.
Thank you.
Welcoming back to Penang.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Some dicey questions.